Talk to me. Talk to me.
Hello and welcome. I'm Dan Gersten, host of Chatting with History, where you can listen into conversations that I have with some of the most famous characters in the history of Western civilization. And today's show is rather special. In fact, our guest is someone who is prominently mentioned in our very first show. We're kind of giving her equal time. Anyhow, it's Eve, whom a lot of people believe was the first woman on this planet. So without further delay, let's meet Eve. Eve, welcome to the show.
Why, thank you, Dan.
As you may know, Adam was Chatting with History's very first guest.
Well, of course I know Dan. How could I not? Why, Adam, he couldn't stop talking about it after you invited him on the show. The poor dear, he couldn't control himself. He was so excited and nervous. I lost count of how many times he had to run to the bathroom. And after the show, there was no talking to him, strutting around like he was some TV star.
Really? I mean, he seemed pretty calm when he was on the show.
Oh yeah, it's amazing what some medications can do these days, isn't it? Still, he had to see his therapist several times during the week right before he was on your show just to deal with his stage fright.
Well, okay, so let's talk about the Garden of Eden. You know, it's believed that Adam was the first person that God created, and that God created you out of one of Adam's ribs while he was sleeping.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
So are you agreeing or disagreeing that Adam was the first person God created, and that you were created out of one of Adam's ribs?
Yes.
Yes?
People will believe what they want to believe, Dan.
Okay then. I mean, still, you know, Adam said he wasn't sure of that whole story and had overheard you and God whispering and giggling about you being created first and that he couldn't handle the truth. So what's the truth?
And what makes you think that you can handle it?
Try me.
Fine.
Fine?
Fine.
Okay. So what's the truth?
Well, the truth is that I was created at the same time as Adam, just in a different part of the garden, the southern part, if you couldn't tell.
Why?
Well, because the southern part was sunnier and warmer, silly.
No. I mean, why were you in different parts of the garden?
Oh, that, why? Well, Jerry wasn't sure whether a man and a woman could live together without constantly arguing, and he needed to feel okay about us being together.
Strange. Why was that?
Well, it all goes back to his childhood.
God's childhood?
Why, Dan, I'm surprised at you. Just like the humans he made in his image, Jerry also has problems from when he was a child.
What kind of problems?
Well, in this particular case, it seems that Jerry, that poor dear, has little memory of his father who left his mama when he was just a child. But what he does remember is that his parents frequently yelled at each other and even threw things. And every time they did, he ran into his room. He was so frightened. And when his father left for a pack of cigarettes one night and never came back, the yelling stopped, leading him to believe that men and women shouldn't be together, especially when his mama repeatedly told him how much better off she was without that bum. Plus, I think that's the main reason why Jerry never married.
Wow, that's some story. So, what led Jerry, God, to bring the two of you together, and why tell Adam that he was created first and that you were, made from one of his ribs?
I have to take some credit for that.
How so?
Well, I convinced Jerry to bring Adam and me together.
Why?
Well, it was lonely in my part of the garden, and I really needed companionship. Plus, seeing as I was straight and Adam was the only man around, I mean, it wasn't as if this garden was this swinging hot spot, even with all the vines hanging down, now was it?
I guess so. Adam said the same thing, and that it was the reason he was with you.
Fine.
Fine?
Fine.
But why tell Adam that you were created out of his rib? I mean, if you weren't.
I had nothing to do with that.
So who did?
Duh. Who do you think? It was all Jerry's idea. I felt that being honest with Adam was the right thing to do. I mean, seriously. How many lasting relationships do you know that are based off of an untruth? Still, I was vetoed by Jerry, who felt that Adam's frail ego required him to believe that he was first.
Really?
Really. Again, it all goes back to God's childhood and his parents. Something about his dad complaining about not being numero uno with his mama as the reason that they fought so much. So, to prevent Adam and me from fighting like his folks, he came up with this verkakter story. How lame is that? I mean, really now.
Yes, when Adam was on, he mentioned not being sure of that story since, he couldn't find the scar. And that there were times when he thought that, God created you for himself.
Well, I think there might be some truth to that. After all, in many cultures and religions, there are tales of gods getting it on with humans, and there were times when I caught Jerry giving me a less than godly look, if you know what I mean. Still Adam had nothing to worry about, as I don't do gods. But I don't think he ever really trusted me in that regard, especially since there were times when we were hot and heavy and I was particularly aroused that I may have yelled things like, oh God, and yes God, and thank you Lord, and poor Adam, he might have misunderstood.
Okay. Not fully trusting the special woman in their lives and thinking them unfaithful, seems to be a problem that many men have. Anyhow, let's talk about the Garden of Eden and the Tree of Knowledge.
Oh, well, the garden was absolutely lovely. It was so beautiful. The sun was always out and the temperature was perfect and the colors were vibrant and the sounds were wonderful, from the rustling of the leaves to the chirping of the songbirds. Oh, it was just so romantic. Or it could have been so romantic.
What does that mean?
Well, Adam doesn't have a romantic bone in his body. I would have said that it was because the only romantic bone he may have had was the rib that I was made from, but we all know that story's bogus now, don't we? Oh yeah, anyhow, I had to constantly remind him of important anniversaries like, our first week, our first month, our 6th Tuesday, stuff like that. And all he seemed interested in was sitting with Jerry and watching different groups of animals play games with each other, bears and lions, coyotes and Bruins. All I know is that I wasn't just the first woman, I was also the first sports widow.
So what did you do when Adam and Jerry, God, were watching these games?
I hung with Sydney.
You hung with Sydney?
Oh, actually, it's more accurate to say that Sydney hung with me. And good thing, too, otherwise I'd have no companionship at all.
So how would you describe your relationship with Sydney?
Oh, Sydney was pretty cool, kind of a rebel, a free thinker. He didn't buy into the whole garden program that Jerry created and really got irritated when Jerry had a snit and played his holier-than-thou card. Anyhow, Sydney was the only creature in the garden that actually listened to me. Adam felt that all I did was complain and nag, and Jerry, well, there were times he creeped me out, always watching me like some peeper.
Wow. That's certainly not the image I have of the garden and of God.
Whatever, you had to be there.
Okay, so tell me about the Tree of Knowledge and, the events that led up to you eating from it and then getting Adam to eat as well.
There's nothing to tell, really. Adam and I had full reign in the garden, and there was only one rule. Don't eat fruit from that tree. The Tree of Knowledge? Well, for the life of me, I didn't understand why not. It was right in the middle of the garden, tempting me every minute of every day. Besides, what would be so terrible about eating from that tree? Well, really now, what was it that Adam and I weren't supposed to know?
I don't have the foggiest.
Well, neither did I. I asked Adam why we couldn't, and he said, because it's a rule. And I asked Jerry why we couldn't, and he said, because he said so. And I asked Sydney why we couldn't, and he said, for no good reason. Go ahead, eat that fruit. What's Jerry gonna do anyway?
And you placed more weight on what Sydney said over what both Adam and God said?
Well, come on now, weren't there times in your life when you were told not to do something, you did it anyway? Plus, in all honesty, it made no sense. Being told because I said so is not a good reason to do or not do something.
Well, sure. When I was a kid. I guess there was just no way that you weren't going to eat from that tree.
That's correct, Dan. After all, I was made in Jerry's image too, and there was no way you could tell him not to do something, now was there? And you know what?
What?
Deep down, I believe Jerry knew I was going to eat that fruit. It was just a matter of when. Why, I think he might have even had some kind of office pool with some of the other gods who had gardens. Plus, I believe he delighted in seeing Adam get so worked up over my saying I was going to eat that fruit. In fact, Jerry was probably more of a mischief maker than Sydney was.
Unbelievable. Adam was right. Jerry's garden would have been a more appropriate name. Meanwhile, what do you mean some of the other gods who had gardens?
Well, I used to catch Jerry having conversations with others whom I couldn't see. I heard bits and pieces of him saying, I hope Mrs. J likes my class project, and how's your garden going, and has your Eve eaten the fruit yet? So I got the impression that the garden was some sort of school assignment and that others had created gardens too. You know, like a computer game, like Gardenville or something like that.
I'm just flabbergasted. So anyhow, back to eating the forbidden fruit.
Oh, anyhow, I don't recall when it was that I finally took a bite of that fruit. You know, it's just another beautiful day in paradise, and after my Pilates class, I decided to lie down under that tree. And I must have dozed off, for the next thing I remember, I was being awakened by some fruit falling on me.
The fruit just fell?
Well, of course. Fruit falls from trees all the time. Haven't you been taught about gravity? Why, I'm surprised that nobody realized that before that Newton fellow made such a big deal about it. Still, I think that Jerry or Sydney might have had something to do with it.
How so?
Well, the wind had picked up quite a bit while I was sleeping, shaking the tree, and you know it's Jerry who can control the elements. And as for Sydney, well, when that fallen fruit woke me up, he was in a branch right above me, looking down, grinning like some Cheshire cat.
Then what?
Well, I asked that sly serpent why it was grinning, and it said, "Eve, look, a sign from Jerry that it's okay to eat the fruit."
And you bought into that?
Well, Sydney had never lied to me before. Why wouldn't I have? Well, besides, I was pretty hungry, and that fruit sure looked appetizing, almost as if it was telling me to eat it, you know, like some cake out of Alice in Wonderland. Only it wasn't cake, I wasn't Alice, and it was not Wonderland. Though that would have been a good name for the garden.
So what'd you do?
Duh! I took a couple of bites. Oh, the first bite was sweet and delicious, and the second was kind of sour and bitter.
So, eating the fruit from the tree of knowledge, what did you learn?
Well, I learned that life is like that fruit. Sometimes sweet and delicious, and sometimes sour and bitter.
That's heavy. What else?
Well, I learned that for the sweet or the good to exist, the sour or not so good has to exist too. I learned that there was a whole other world outside the garden, and that it was filled with both good and not so good things, just like the garden itself was.
The garden had not so good things? What does that mean?
Well, it certainly seemed as if there was nothing that wasn't good in the garden, but that really wasn't the case when you scratched beneath that surface. Well, sure, the garden was beautiful, and except for the fruit that was forbidden there wasn't a single thing that Adam and I lacked or couldn't do.
Well, you know, that's certainly the way that many picture what the Garden of Eden was like.
Still, Adam and I weren't really soulmates, and we didn't always see eye to eye, and Jerry showed us to be anything but that perfect God we would have liked him to be. And Sydney? Well, that serpent showed itself to be nothing more than a snake in the grass with legs. In retrospect, I realized that the garden was nothing more than an illusion that Jerry created because he thought he was protecting Adam and I from the not-so-good things outside the garden.
Well, you know, we'll touch on that in a little while, but I want to get back to what happened after you bit into the forbidden fruit.
Oh, whatever.
So, you bit into the forbidden fruit, and then what?
Well, nothing happened, which really surprised me. I mean, here I was being told not to eat from that tree, and when I did, nothing happened. No lightning flashes, no thunderclaps, no fire, no brimstone, no earthquakes, nada. Nothing. Kind of disappointed and anticlimactic in a way.
And then?
Well, whatever grin Sydney had got even wider, and he said, "See, I told you nothing would happen. Why don't you find Adam and have him take a bite?" So I went off to find Adam, which wasn't very hard as he was sitting in his favorite spot watching those damn animals playing again.
What'd you do?
Well, first I tried to get his attention by walking around in my best, "Oh, I got something you'll like" kind of way. And, just like it was after I bit into the fruit, nothing happened. And then I tried vacuuming, and that didn't work either. So finally, I just stood in front of him, and I took another bite of that fruit, and that got his attention, I'll say.
Okay, why don't you hold on right there? I mean, this seems like a good place to take a brief break. So don't go away, and we'll be right back with Eve and Chatting with History. Hello and welcome back to Chatting with History. I'm Dan Gersten and I've been chatting with Eve, who's about to tell us of the day that both she and Adam were evicted from the Garden of Eden. So without further delay, let's get back to our story.
So I went off to find Adam, which wasn't very hard as he was sitting in his favorite spot watching those damn animals playing again.
What'd you do?
Well, first I tried to get his attention by walking around in my best, oh, I got something you'll like kind of way. And, just like it was after I bit into the fruit, nothing happened. And then I tried vacuuming, and that didn't work either. So finally, I just stood in front of him, and I took another bite of that fruit, and that got his attention, I'll say.
And then?
He couldn't believe it. What, you're eating that fruit, that forbidden fruit? How could you? Why, the poor boy was beside himself with worry, pacing back and forth and wringing his hands and pulling on his hair. He even called his therapist, but only got the answering machine. Finally, I had to resort to questioning his manhood, which I knew would be effective. I mean, what relatively macho guy wouldn't want to prove that he's not a wuss? So he grabbed that fruit right out of my hand and he took the biggest bite I have ever seen.
Yes, he told us that. Said he even got some of the fruit stuck in his throat and that it's still there.
Why, he almost choked to death. I had to perform some kind of maneuver to dislodge most of what he ate, but he still had this lump in his throat, and even to this day, that hasn't gone away.
You've eaten the forbidden fruit, as has Adam. What next?
Well, we were waiting for something to happen, and nothing did. Well, at least nothing did right away. Soon afterwards, Jerry appeared, and he seemed all fine and dandy, like nothing was wrong and everything was right in his garden, and Adam and I couldn't believe it. I mean, here we were, told not to eat that fruit and feeling that if we did, the wrath of Jerry would be upon us, and here he is, all buddy-buddy.
Really?
Really?
But we're told that you and Adam were punished.
Well, we were. No thanks to Sydney.
What do you mean?
Well, Adam and I weren't the only ones surprised that Jerry wasn't aware we had eaten from the tree of knowledge. Sydney couldn't believe it. And once he realized that nothing was going to happen, he made sure that Jerry knew. Oh, big boy, you notice anything different? Yo, almighty one, do Adam and Eve seem a little bit more knowledgeable to you? Say, God, dude, when was the last time you inventoried the forbidden fruit? Hey, Jerry, check the freaking fruit. I think one's missing.
Yeah, and you thought Sydney was your friend.
Yeah. Sadly, the expression about not trusting those who speak with a forked tongue hadn't been coined yet. Anyhow, thanks to Sydney, Jerry realized what Adam and I had done, and oh boy, was he pissed, ranted and raved about how nobody listens to him, and how could we have done this to him, and how he can't trust anyone. Oh, he was having a tantrum like some kid in a toy store whose mom told him he can't have Tickle Me Elmo, and Sydney was loving it.
So, how were you and Adam punished?
Jerry, once he calmed down a bit, he asked us what we had done, and being fearful of what he might do, especially after that fit he had just had, we confessed. But Adam blamed me for tempting him with the fruit, and I blamed Sydney for telling me that Jerry, had wanted me to eat it, and Sydney blamed Jerry for creating the garden and not giving it something to do other than cause trouble.
Yeah, it sure seems to be a lot of finger pointing going on.
Whew, I'll say, and giving the finger too.
So what was the punishment?
Jerry told us to go to our room, and after he realized we didn't have one, he kicked us out of the garden. He took away our immortality and told us that we'd be on the outside where we'd have to make it on our own. And Adam would now have to bear the pain of working in the fields and hunting to provide food, and I would have to bear the pain of childbirth. Plus, that now that we were on the outside of the garden, we'd have to wear clothes to protect ourselves from the elements, which was more of a punishment for Adam than for me, since I love clothes.
Yeah, Adam felt you got the better of the punishment deal, which he really couldn't understand since it was you who first ate the fruit and then, enticed him to eat it.
Now, isn't that just like him, not taking responsibility? That boy ate that fruit, and he should stop blaming me for making him eat it.
So what was it like on the outside?
Oh, it was no garden, I'll tell you that. Well, first we needed to find some shelter, and I found this cute little 4-room cave located in what would eventually be a planned community. And then Adam needed to learn to work the fields and hunt, and I took it upon myself to furnish the cave and design our clothing, which, let me tell you, was pretty hard on me.
And we're told that you started a family.
Yes, we did. But honestly, I must confess that neither Adam nor I really wanted kids. I mean, they are a lot of work. And many of them never truly appreciate what you're doing for them. Still, kids, are one way to increase your labor force and help you provide for the family. Plus, if you're lucky and did a good job raising them, some of them even take care of you as you get older.
I've read conflicting reports as to who was your first child, whether there was some born in the garden, and some question as to whom is the father of Cain.
Well, that's what you get when the game of telephone is played over a few millennia, a story that gets distorted over time. My first child was a son we named Cain, and he was named that because it's the Hebrew word for yes, a word that I screamed over and over again towards the end of childbirth, and once it was over, I was just so relieved. Anyway, he was born outside the garden at Cedar Sinai, and his father was Adam, though there are those who will say it was somebody named Satan. What a load of crap.
How so?
Well, that was a rumor started by Adam. He and I weren't doing that well as a couple, and he was just trying to get out of child support payments should he and I split. Plus, he even thought that I got pregnant on purpose just so he'd stay with me. I mean, really, what woman in her right mind would do something like that? My Lord. No, he's the father, all right.
And after Cain?
Well, we had a second son we named Abel. Actually, he was one of a pair of twins, a sister we named Willin. Abel was capable of doing almost anything that you needed done, and Willin, well, she was, let's just say that there were times when she might have been a little too willing, if you know what I mean. Anyhow, after those two, there were many, many other children. So many, I forget their names. Except for Seth, that is.
Seth?
Well, Seth was our third son. We would have stopped with Cain and Abel, but poor Abel died, and Cain left us. So we decided to try for another son to keep the family farm going.
So what can you tell us about Cain and Abel?
Oh, it pains my heart to talk about it. Let's just say that the brothers' lack of brotherly love erupted into an act of violence, and that Cain attacked and killed his brother, and Jerry's in part to blame for that.
Jerry? I mean, what did God have to do with this?
Well, after we were kicked out of the garden, Jerry didn't talk to us anymore. In fact, he kind of disappeared on us. Then once we started having children, he came back and interacted with them.
And what was so terrible about that?
Lots of people believe that Jerry's this all-loving God and that he loves everybody to the same degree. Well, that is not true. He plays favorites. I mean, why else would winning athletes and performers be thanking him if he loved losers and not just winners? No, Jerry plays people against each other like it's some kind of game, and that's what he was doing with Cain and Abel, dissing Cain and favoring Abel.
How so?
It was like two boys seeking the affection of this really cute girl, but it wasn't a girl, it was Jerry. And he made it seem like everything Abel did was wonderful and that nothing that Cain did was. Why, it drove Cain crazy. Crazy to the point that he killed his own brother. And then Jerry makes it appear that it was all Cain's fault and banishes him.
Wow. Guess God was really angry with you and Adam.
Yeah. Oh, this was worse than being kicked out of the garden. There is no more terrible a punishment for a mother than losing a child. And Jerry took away both my sons.
Yeah. Seems we have an unforgiving God.
Well, he surely was at that time. Supposedly he got it, from his mama, although I heard he's mellowed over these thousands of years.
You haven't stayed in touch?
Not really. After all, I, like many of my offspring, inherited our difficulty in forgiving and forgetting him. And he went way too far.
Moving on, Adam said that you and he are still together.
Yes, that's true. I guess after being together over the millennia, you fall into a kind of comfortable complacency. Still, I try dating every now and then, but once potential partners learn who I am, they run away, like I'm some kind of original sin or something.
Well, we've just about run out of time, and I'd like to thank you, Eve, for coming on the show. As is customary, any parting comments for our audience?
Yes, Dan. Many people have this image of the garden as being some sort of paradise where everything was perfect. And in some regards it was. It was truly beautiful, and you couldn't have asked for better weather, even if you lived in San Diego. Plus it was all natural, and even the animals with all their games and contests got along. Still, paradise was flawed. Not because of what was in it, but because of who was in it. Adam, myself, and perhaps most of all, Jerry. Humans and their gods, whether the creators of humans or the creations of humans, they're flawed. And like the fruit from that tree of knowledge, we all have qualities and behaviors that are good and not so good. We can love some and hate others. We can seek equality for some and deny our rights and opportunities to others, and so on. When I bit into that fruit, the illusion of the garden disappeared. And I saw Jerry much as Dorothy must have seen the wizard when she pulled back that curtain. And at that moment I realized that powerful as he was, and perhaps still is, that he had the same wants and needs to be loved and respected and listened to as I did. And realizing that, I learned that there's a little bit of God in me, in Adam, and in all people. So let's remember that. And the next time you look to God for answers, perhaps you'll look within yourself and within others instead.
And there you have it. Words of wisdom from the first woman. And certainly something that many of us ought to think about. So until our next Chatting with History, this is Dan Gersten, reminding all of you that sometimes it's best to pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, and instead seek to find the God that's within each and every one of us. Thank you for watching.
Talk to me. Talk to me. I love the things you say. Talk to me. Talk to me. I love the things you say.
Hello, I'm Dan Gersten, and I've created and produced a TV show called Chatting with History, in which I chat with some of the most famous characters in the history of Western civilization. Guests to date have included Adam, Noah, Moses, Christopher Columbus, George Washington, and Eve. And future guests will include Alexander Graham Bell, Jesus, Ben Franklin, Leonardo da Vinci, and God, although he isn't the easiest of guests to get a hold of. It airs on your local community access cable TV station, and it really shows the power of this medium where average citizens can get involved and help crew and produce and create TV shows. I mean, it's truly wonderful. So consult your local listings to see when this show might air in your area and watch.
Talk to me. Talk to me. I love the things you say. Talk to me.